All right, nice. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. So this is the first event as part of the symposium organized by the Participatory Land-Based and Critical Ecologies Research Collective, or PLACE for short. And this symposium is supported by CLACS and hosted by the Department of Geography, the Environmental Science Policy and Management Graduate Program, and also the College of Environmental Design. So first I'm gonna do some acknowledgement, everyone to help make this event possible. And I want to thank PLACE co-founders, graduate students Sydney Moss and Margot Cohen for all the work they put in organizing this symposium and also all the events throughout the year. Thanks also to CLACS Director Natalia Venezuela and Program Coordinator Carlos Gutierrez, and also Greg. Thank you. Here at Geography, also thanks to Ambrosia and Ali for helping us make this happen. So I believe Bjørn Sletto is the perfect person to start us with this symposium around this topic. He is a professor of community and regional planning at the University of Texas at Austin. Bjørn has extensive experience in community-based research, environmental justice, and insurgent and decolonial planning. He's a leading scholar in social mapping with more than 20 years of experience in Latin America and the Caribbean. And he has published critical works in leading journals in geography, planning, anthropology. He has recently published 2 books that you will see that there in the table. 2 edited books, one on social mapping in Latin America titled Radical Cartographies, Participatory Mapmaking from Latin America, and more recently, Decolonial Planning with examples from around the world. Bjørn's lecture today draws on his experience engaging with indigenous landscapes in Venezuela and urban communities in Dominican Republic throughout the long-term collaborative work. Focusing on social cartographies, he will delve into the impacts of representation, research positionality, and the impact of maps as community-driven methods to territorial claims, cultural continuity, and political visibility. I need to say I'm really more than excited to have Bjørn here because he was my PhD advisor my time during my PhD in UT Austin, and he has been my mentor for many, many years. So it's been really, really nice to have him here. And I really appreciate his teachings, his commitment to students and communities, and also all his generosity and time with us. So he was also in my class before today, so it really meant a lot to me to have him here. So please join me in welcome Bjørn.
Thank you. Thank you, Geronimo. You're making me all like, I'm going to start tearing up. So you're so sweet. Thank you so much for kind words. And it's been such a nice pleasure to see Geronimo again. I hadn't seen each other for a couple of years, I think. And so it was just wonderful. He picked me up at the airport, and we were lucky to get stuck in a very slow traffic. So we had more than an hour to catch up. So it's been great. And Luciana is here, my current student at UT, is living in the area. It's nice to see you too. And Sydney is back there somewhere. Thank you so much for helping set up everything. And Danielle, it's good to see you too. So it's a little bit of a reunion. I'm very pleased to be here. I was talking with Sydney and Geronimo about what to talk about and how to sort of frame this talk, and we were struggling a little bit with sort of what to pick and choose and how to frame it. And I realized that it seems like most of you here in the room are interested in, engaged in participatory methods and in community-based research and so forth. I think, anyway, right? It seems like most of you are. So in the spirit of developing theory from praxis, I was thinking I'll tell you stories. Okay, that was not inauspicious beginning, right? tell you some some stories based on the work in the communities and see if we can tease out some theoretical lessons from things that happen in encounters, moments in the field. Maybe we can just put them on the tables back there. They're going to fall down again. So I'm in urban planning. And you're like, why is somebody in urban planning doing work like this? Which is a good question, because it's unusual. The work I do is relatively unusual in urban planning. I think most of you, when you think of planning, you probably think of like roads and transportation and maybe economic development and so on. And that is probably more common in planning. And the kind of work that I do, and I think Danielle is also in this area, what we do is sort of a minority maybe in the field, but we work closely with communities from an engaged scholarship and activist scholarship, activist research position, partnering with communities and orienting our methods and our research towards the needs of the communities. So the stories I'm going to share today are about research that really originated in communities, and they were developed through dialogue and partnership between me and often with students and with community leadership. And so there are people doing that sort of work in planning. I think another thing not to foreground here is when you do this sort of work, it's very important to develop relationships, right? So the work sort of is contingent on trusting, reciprocal relationships with communities, which often means some sort of intermediaries or some sort of groups or something that you work with. So that's one dimension that's really important. I would say another dimension that maybe we're going to get into more today is try to, the best you can as somebody like, someone like me I'm from Norway originally, and you can see who I am, right? And for somebody like me to work in these communities, there's a lot of distance in terms of ontology, spatiality, understanding how other people view land and memory and the future and the past and all these things. There are very different ontologies and epistemologies at play. So it's a matter of developing these relationships, but also developing a mindset of learning, of trying to understand where other people are coming from, so you can try your best to sort of meet, because the goals are there. Often community members see in me somebody who can maybe facilitate some connection, facilitate development of some technical product or some designs or something, right? So it's a matter of developing common shared understanding at the best to our abilities. So you're going to see in my talk, I'm starting with this little phrase. It'll make more sense a little bit later. Somebody named Aquilino said he saw me full of mud. I will explain that later. So I'm alluding to the intimacies of this sort of work. Because I started by saying planning tends to be maybe a little more remote. There's a lot of GIS work. There's a lot of design happening in studios and so forth. The engagement with communities tend to be formal, like a formal community meeting, And the sort of work that I do is very, very, very intimate. You work in small places, small spaces, closely with people. There's a lot of sharing, a lot of storytelling, a lot of emotion. And I think about that a lot. I think about how I navigate that and what sort of knowledge sits in those relationships and sits in those relationships people have with place and so forth, So that's why I'm going to talk about place, memory, and the body today in community engaged research. So I was saying that in the spirit of theory development coming from practice, I wanted to start out with telling stories, right? So what I'm drawing on here sort of loosely is decolonial thinking. And this is not to say that decoloniality is like a theory. It's more like a perspective that I found very useful recently, which is why I got together with some amazing colleagues and we put together this book on decolonizing perspectives in urban planning. Because I find that this theoretical work around these questions of decolonizing sort of brings together notions of embodiment and memory and place and the body that I find useful. And it brings in thinking about knowledge production that I find useful. So, just showing you this. This is one of the authors that is foundational in this work, like Linda Smith, right? And she starts, I want to start with her quote saying, research is a significant site of struggle between the interests and ways of knowing of the West and interests and ways of resisting the other. So, in other words, it right away tells us that research is not a simple thing. It's not just an apolitical thing. You just, I'm just going out here collecting some data from this community. No, it's very political, right? And so that makes us, I think this literature makes me think about where our notions of empiricism is coming from, and that sort of the positives ideas that drive a lot of urban planning, especially, right? Makes me think about that and like, okay, where is that coming from? Well, Walter Mignolo, who is another decolonial scholar, he writes about epistemic disobedience. And he says, like, knowledge is situated and every knowledge is constructed. Okay, he says. But that's just the beginning. He's saying, the question is who, when, why is constructed. Why did Eurocenter epistemology? So here I'm sort of simplistically translating that to the sort of Enlightenment tradition and with people like Descartes and Bacon, and thinking about Eurocenter from Walter Mignolo's perspective. Why did Eurocenter epistemology conceal its own geohistorical and biographical locations? So I'm actually teaching this class this semester in planning theory for PhD students, and I had them read Francis Bacon. We talked about how empiricism was sort of articulated sort of fully by Francis Bacon in a specific place, in a specific moment in Europe, right? So anyway, so this is important for me to think through when I work with indigenous people in Venezuela, that I don't step into these communities with with assumptions about the higher validity, or like my knowledge, right, my training and so forth. Okay, so let's talk about place then. And there's a lot of people I could cite here, but I'm citing Søren Larsen and Jay Johnson because they're geographers. So a lot of you are in geography here, right? So they're geographers and working on North American indigenous geography, and they're reminding me that they are telling us that no particular space is separated as privileged for exploration and discovery, right? So they're arguing that indigenous active investigation presupposes an entire genealogical cosmology, which is place-based. It's based on place-based relationships. Place is central to the process of discovery and active collaborator in the production of knowledge. So I think I'm going to try to show you with the next few slides about how place acted in the development of some maps in Venezuela, and it acted through bodies of elders in this work. So Venezuela, and it's been in the news quite a bit recently. So I worked in the area in the southeast of the country called the Gran Sabana, on the border with Guyana and Brazil. And it's about 24 hours. It used to take 24 hours on a bus from Caracas to go there. And I was fortunate to be invited to live there with the Pemon people for a couple of years, quite a few years ago now, doing this research. And that was a map that fell down as a result of that work. So the Pemon live in a savanna landscape. So you can see here, this is the top of a hill, and you are seeing a family just walking from one settlement to another. They have a lot of different settlements where they spend time depending on the season for hunting and fishing and gardening, so on. And communities like this are sort of found throughout the area. And just a couple more pictures of this life ways. This is the fishing with the barbasco plant that I think some of you saw in the film we showed in class today. It's a fishing tradition that involves pounding these roots of this plant, and it turns the water like gray like this, and it takes oxygen out of the water, and it's easier to catch the fish. Successful hunt, you might notice the blackened grass, right? So they use fire for hunting in the sense of burning the grasses, and that makes the ferns that grow in the ecotone sort of scorched, and the deer really like toasted fern. So it becomes an opportunity for hunting. Right? So in this area, like I said, I lived there for a couple of years, and the whole work took 5 years. Right? So this was pretty much my entire period of my dissertation research. By the way, my dissertation research was not this. My dissertation research was on fire management. And it's an area, like you saw, it's a savanna landscape with forest patches. And it's there's a state agency that manages fire through fire suppression strategies. While the Pemon saying, no, we need to do fire, we need to burn, we need to do prescriptive burning to reduce fuel load, right? So it's a sort of a fundamental difference in that regard. So that was my research. This is something I did on the side as a matter of reciprocity with the communities. So here you can see them work on this mapping project, and I had more time in Hieronymo's class this morning to explain how this went, and I think for the workshop tomorrow, maybe I can talk more about the methods involved. But it basically involved community members in 12 different communities holding workshops there, and then having hand-drawn maps that I sort of translated through GIS into the maps you see in the back there. So that's 5 seconds to explain a very complex and long process, right? So those are some scenes from the mapping workshop. I think one thing we could say is that this sort of work, in my experience with communities, it's far beyond just the instrumental task of making a map. It involves a lot of storytelling, a lot of sharing, a lot of conversation, a lot of learning, intergenerational, and in ways that a lot of elders told me this is the first time. It's been so long since I had a chance to speak with the youth, right? So it's very important from that perspective, from sort of a community building perspective. This is an example of the first stage map, which was hand-drawn maps. So this is a hand-drawn map from one of the communities, and I know one person in the room has seen it before, but this is a hand-drawn map of elders from this community. It's called Participatory. And I always ask people if they can guess what the black line on top is. And you know, don't answer, you know the answer. The black line of the community, anybody guess? Yes, in the back? Yes, excellent. Yes. It's because this is not a regular plan view map, right? This is a panoramic map. Right, so the map is drawn from a hill down here. So when you walk across this landscape, you get to the top of this hill and you see the community way in the distance. And then above that you see the mountain, what do you call it, the line of the mountains, horizon. And you'll also notice a lot of blue lines, which you can probably surmise are creeks and rivers. And so, this is an example of how, being an outsider like me, I spent a lot of time there, but I was learning the whole time, and I learned relatively early on through maps like this that rivers are the main arteries or main landmarks for navigation in this landscape. Like I say to students, like the street grid in the American city, right? So anyway, oops. The next phase involved drawing maps with some landmarks in a systematic way. Not the first map was very much, here's a blank sheet of paper. Would you please draw a map of your territory? This one here is a map with some landmarks. We now need you to draw maps in accordance with the Venezuelan constitution in order for you to present these to government for land rights claims, right? So it's a very clear, explicit sort of outcome we are looking for. So here you can actually see this. This is the Pan American Highway that runs through the Gran Sabana, goes all the way from Caracas to Boa Vista and Manaus, right? And these black lines are these, and this one are two rivers that were visible in a remote sensing image. So I was able to georeference and locate and trace those rivers. And then this community was actually on a state map. So because this area had not been mapped before at all, right? Basically none of this. The only thing that was available from existing shapefiles were those things. So the city, that community, the two rivers, and the road. Too much detail to get into, but basically that's how we started. So imagine that was all we had on this map, and all of this is filled in by a group of young people who work with me. You can see a little closer up, and a little closer up. So it's a hand drawn by a group of about 12 freshman age sort of students, community members who worked with me for all these years. And then I digitized all of this. Again, lots and lots and lots of questions and decisions to discuss about how this was done, but I turned this into a GIS. And you can see closer up. And there was a logo. The group of young people wanted the logo for the project. So one of them was an artist, and he drew this. And it's very much, we were talking about this earlier today in class, this is very much a rhetorical but political representation by this community. So this is their counter map. This is how they want to show the world that this space is. I'm turning to this quote now, because I was saying there's a lot surrounding this. There's a lot of conversation and politics and agency sort of surrounding this. And I like this quote because it's very profound. There's a lot of things going on in this quote. By Rafael Rodriguez, who was sort of, I guess he was like the consejero, or the like my mentor, as it were, as an elder in this community. So he advised me and my young colleagues. So he said this after one of the early workshops where elders had demonstrated that map that I showed that map to the community, and young people had drawn maps and they showed their maps to the community. So after the young people from this community, Kumarakapa, had shown their map, Rafael was like, oh my God. He got up and he said this, right? You young people don't know anything. Okay. Because those who know are we, the grandfathers. Right? So he's claiming authority because of age, because of longevity in this area, right? But you don't. This is because the grandfathers have been moving back and forth from one place to the next. So right away that tells me something about the way in which knowledge valued, right? And this goes back to the sort of question about decoloniality, right? In the sense that I arrive with a certain book training from college, right? And he's basically saying, what matters is that we've been walking back and forth for a long time. Yeah, so that's the highest knowledge. So he's making that very clear, explicit statement. And that's because of this, we know everything up to the corners. And so I think this is a very critical point in terms of like the hierarchy of knowledge in this context. After we do this, he's referring to the mapping project. After we do this, all who come after us will know, right? So he's seeing, there's a normative sort of end here. The end is like, okay, we're documenting this for the future. It's gonna be on paper. It's gonna persist. They will see all the places, the rivers, the hills, that he has in his memory, and that sort of embodied him through his walking. We need to put down everything, because in the future, if we leave spaces open, people might take them from us. And I think that's really important too, because that to me is sort of like it's like a you have to write your research proposal, you have to have a research goal or a research question, So to me, that is sort of he's articulating the goal for this mapping project. We have to put down everything. So he's alluding to like fine details. So the maps need to get filled in. And we can't leave spaces open. Because in other words, the map will serve as this representation. It will demonstrate use, right? And if there is if there's openness, the state is going to be like, oh, you're not using this space, right? So that was what I was thinking about in terms of place, because it made me think of the fact that Raphael and other elders who were like in their 70s, had spent like their whole life walking, right? They had stories of every single place. There was this really intimacy between the place and their body. So I was often thinking about that when Raphael and Antonio and others would speak about the land. They often would move like this, and you can almost feel that there was a connection between them and the place they're talking about, right? So that was the first one, so about place. Memory. So I am just showing this quote from Toni Morrison because it's beautiful, and it makes me think a lot about. It talks about water, and this is not part of my talk, but I'm working in Austin right now in a community in South Austin where there's a creek and there's been a lot of flooding. Water has a lot of it has a presence in people's memories, and people will say there, and Luciana, I remember people will say like water has memory. There's the agency of water is thought about differently than the measurement of speed of water and height of the water and so forth, right? It's something more, something deeper than that. So they talk about the emotional memory. So I wanted to get at that too. Hearing stories like Raphael's make me think about how the past is brought into the future through bodies like Raphael's, So now I'm going to switch you to western Venezuela, to the border with Colombia, in an area called the Sierra de Perijá, on the border with Colombia. So here you have indigenous communities. This is a far smaller area, and sort of extension, and the landscape is like this, like it's hillier, and you don't have the savanna landscape here. And you still have traditional houses like this. The Yukpa live in this, it's very mountainous. So they live in these mountainous communities that are like extremely for somebody like me, it was extremely hard to climb those hills, right? It's very high into the mountains, and I used to use mules to get back and forth. And there is still sort of trade across into Colombia as well. I have relatives on both sides, just like the Pomona relatives in Brazil and so forth. So these are some of the communities higher up in the mountains. So what was going on when I was there? This is more recent. Is that the Yukpa? I think I might have told. Did I tell you that when I started working in the Gran Sabana, that was shortly after Hugo Chavez was elected president. There was a new socialist constitution, and there was an opening for indigenous territorial rights. I don't know if I mentioned that. So that was one of the motivations for this mapping project. This is a few years later, but it was still a glimmer of hope among indigenous people that this was going to actually turn into the territorial rights, this new constitution. And so the Yukpa saw this opportunity to do what they refer to as rescuing land, rescuing ranches or haciendas that were located on their ancestral territory. So they would refer to as rescatar, and also rescue the haciendas. And so here you see an example of a family I got to know who are staying within one of these haciendas that they had. The hacendados would say they're occupying, right? They said, no, we are rescuing the land. We're bringing the land back to the community. And here you can see another scene from a hacienda. And so we ended up doing a very similar. It was the same motivation of the indigenous, of the leadership, that we want to finally claim the territorial rights to this area. And we wanted to include these haciendas that we are rescuing, right? So the methods we follow here are relatively similar, although I didn't have 5 years in this area. I had 3 long summers, like 9 months or so, to do this work. This is one of the haciendas, and this is one of those moments where I was brought on the walk by a group of community members and a couple of elders in preparation for taking back an hacienda. So it was like a scouting expedition, as it were. So we went on this walk through this hacienda, past these hacienda buildings. We were recording GPS coordinates. You could see this is so long ago that we were using this handheld GPS units. There was no iPhones. And we were doing that, and we were recording this, taking notes. And then there's one moment that became really important to me that has to do with memory. Jesus Peñaranda, who is in this picture, the other people in the walk, I got this translated later. They basically were walking through this forested area of Hacienda, and they were saying, Jesus, you need to tell the story of this place. And then Jesus said, okay, that means I have to go there. I can't just tell a story here, I have to be there, right? I have to be in that spot. So we walked to the spot, and that's what he's telling that story, right there by the side of a road, and this is partly what he's saying in that story. The place where we're standing now is Yucatotpe. That's where the chiefs and the warriors and the past ancestors, where they would hide and wait for the enemy. In other words, it's the boundary, the original boundary of the territory. This is why this place remained in our roots, right? So I'm grappling with this idea, right, because there's the memory of it, and the place itself, it's still there, right? The memory of the place still lives, even today. But then it makes me think, like, why did Jesus have to be there when he told the story? You know what I mean? There was this interesting connection between his body embodying the memory of that place, you know? So I'm grappling with that, you know, thinking about that. And so the location is where we're hiding, waiting for those to come to invade the land. So this story remains, the spot remains, represented by Jesus, you know. So we developed these maps, and this is similar, maybe in style, but we're getting a little more contouring here. Our GIS skills are improving, and you see it's similar to the other map in that we have photos and we have storytelling going on in the margins. And again, I think that's really important, that it's not just the map frame. You know, it's not just like this rigor of representation that we're talking about. We're talking about the story told by the map and what it invokes and what it does, what sort of work it does politically. It has a logo as well, drawn by the community members. It has, in this case of that map too, it has the icons, the legends, are drawn by school children, having like a day off from school to draw that. So they draw different things representing the crabs that are caught in certain places, and fruits and homes and gardening. The corn is really important, hunting areas, and so forth. Sacred sites, being the sun. So here is another, to conclude this section. This is Javier, who's actually Jesus' brother. He's referring to one of the elements on the map, which is the hand-drawn board on the bottom of the map that tells the history of the community, of the people in the map form. It's very interesting. So he's saying that thanks to the historian Jesus Peñaranda, the elder, this is never going to be defeated. We're going to guide ourselves from the history, caves, map, animals. So I think that is also very interesting to me, and helps me think through the relation between the representation and the phenomena, and the past and the future, right? It sort of puts it all together in that statement. So that he is referring to the elder Jesus Peñaranda on the left, who is other Jesus' father, right? So this is Jesus Padre, and Jose Itiborque. So these are two gentlemen who both had been caciques, or chiefs, in the community. They are pictured on this map that I showed you. And Francisco, when he saw the map, he was like really taken with the picture, not with the map itself, right? And because I was expecting to show the map to community members that are going to be, oh, look at this, you know, they were going to like do like a design critique like we do in architecture and planning. Like, no, they read the map very differently. They appropriated into their stories very differently than I expected, right? So Francisco is like, that's what matters, right? Those two gentlemen are very old now, right? And when they disappear from this earth, it will be like we don't exist anymore, right? Because the memory situated in their bodies will be gone, right? And he said, but now we have them, the two Atanchas ancestors with their flute on the map, right? So anyway, so I'm putting out a lot of sort of quotes and stories that I'm still processing a lot myself, you know what I mean? But it's what the colonial sort of thinking it tells us we have to do, right? We have to keep trying to understand and try to keep learning. So that brings it to, I sort of alluded to the body a lot throughout the talk, and so we'll conclude with this. I'm going to bring you to a different area of the world. I'm going to bring you to the Dominican Republic. First I wanted to show you a quote from Maria Lugones, And basically she's saying, at first she's saying like coloniality infiltrates everything. And levels of the body, the power relations of power at the levels of the body, right? And law and property and possession of land and all these things that we live with, like private land ownership and so forth, right? It infiltrates everything. But she's saying that logic, efficacy are always met by different concrete bodies, right? So she's emphasizing the intimate. She's emphasizing the embodied relations that people have. And there's their selves and relations to the spirit world, right? So this appeals to me, even though I'm grappling with understanding it, and there's a lot of ways you can read this quote, but I'm thinking about the kind of work that I've been doing in the Dominican Republic, where the intimacies and relationships are so powerful with each other, and where will be referred to as marginality and struggle and disempowerment is lived and felt very intimately on the body, right? And which is like, when I bring my students to places like this, they struggle because in the Austin, they're not accustomed to this sort of vividness, the visceralness of relations with things and each other, you know? Anyway, so this is what I'm talking about in this section. Again, I'm not really giving you answers, right? I'm putting out what I'm thinking about in this regard. Working in, again, this is in Dominican Republic, and Santo Domingo is divided into these different municipalities, the capital, Santo Domingo. So this Distrito Nacional is like the national congresses and stuff, and I worked in the community in Santo Domingo Norte that's called Los Platanitos, and I worked there for almost 20 years now. I brought, I think, 8 groups of students to Los Platanitos over the years, starting in 2008, and the last group was in 2024. So it's gone through a lot of changes in that time. So here's just an overview of the community. So it's very different than the Venezuelan communities that you saw. It's a very dense community, and this is actually a staircase. On the right there, I would walk down there to the right, and from the communities higher up, are more well off, whereas the lower you go, the more marginalized, the more difficult life is. So I think you can get a sense from this picture of how tight everything is, which is another thing that impresses my students, because when you're walking around there, you have like one house here and one there, and it's just like, it's very, very intimate. There are people you jostle around with, people playing dominoes, and it's that kind of energy and relationality that's lived like that. It's striking to students, and I think it's very important to grapple with what that means for agency and for organizing in the community. It's the kind of place where, another thing that students struggle with, and I do too, it's this, what's sometimes posited as a paradox between, like, on the one hand, clearly this is a community, if you look at it from a political economic Marxist perspective, it's a community that's completely eviscerated. They're excluded from the city. They're and on the other hand, it's also as a community with a lot of agency. They built this community themselves. People built this community. There's a lot of pride. There's a lot of energy in the community as well, right? So how do we you have to deal with that contradiction as you do this work. And I put this picture here because the street name here is Nuestro Esfuerzo, which is like our effort. Yeah. So this sort of, to me, this sort of reflects the way in which people there are like, they built this community in struggle, and they're proud of that. While at the same time, they know they have they should have more support from the state, and so forth. It's a place where characterized by a lot of torrential sort of rains, and they have hurricanes in Dominican Republic, right? So before a recent stormwater project, you had flooding happening quite a bit. And houses, you can see the houses are right on the level of the water there. So water would fill the alleys and get into people's houses. Because as you notice from the first picture, that the community is in this canyon, right? And the people on the bottom are the most vulnerable. Also the poorest and also the most at risk for flooding. When we started working there until recently, it was something called a cañada, which is like a creek on the bottom. That was essentially had become an open sewer. And when we had these big rains, that open sewer flooded over into people's homes. Right, so it was very, very bad situation. And here is the cañada behind some improvised retaining wall down here. So this is pictures from, this is up to 2016. And then in 2017, the state agency started developing the stormwater project. I started laying these pipes, storm drains is what they're called, the pipes, going up through the community. And you had a period from 2018 to 2020 or so when the work sort of stalled. And this picture is literally showing this turn into this, right? So it was a completely transformed landscape, because literally where the bicyclists, where the boys are, that's where the cañada was. So it's like inverted. You know what I mean? It's a cañada was like this, and now it's been, pipe is filled in, and then there's infill on top. So now the cañada is suddenly higher than their surrounding area. So it's a little hard to see, but. And what does that mean? Well, it means that when it rained now, you have these ponds next to the road, right? So you had a couple of years where it was terrible, it was worse than ever before. But then finally they got the road put in. And now this is 2024. So it's a pretty stark difference, right? What don't have time to tell you much about is the fact that when you realize here used to be houses, those are gone, right? And for a long time during this period, the community members did not know what was going to happen to those whose houses were torn down. There was no guarantee. The government was like, that agency was like, well, we are just putting in the road and ask somebody else. Because that was that agency's job, right? But the community had developed some organization. They had this really, really amazing women's-led organization that took the lead in sort of pushing the state, pushing the city, and so forth until they relented and developed apartments for the displaced, and also some housing within the community. Just to talk a little bit about mapping, this is not a community where we've done a lot of participatory mapping. Here has been more arts-based methods, and I think some of you in the room are interested in like video and photography, photo, voice and stuff. So we've done a lot of that. And a lot of oral history and storytelling and focus groups and surveys and all sorts of stuff. Like not so much mapping, but one of the early projects in 2008, we try to map out areas of risk and vulnerability, and especially where children would be at risk. So we basically use a very different base map here. The base map here is a aerial, Google Earth aerial. You can sort of hard to see, and then this is an AutoCAD model. I don't know if anybody, it's like a design program, right? Where you, yeah. And so anyway, so we overlay the building footprint of the houses next to the cañada, the sewer. And then we did this exercise to map out areas, and we turn it into these maps. And you know, you might ask me, like what is the actual sort of political policy action outcome of this? And you know, I cannot answer exactly what prompted the city to do what. It's really almost impossible to do that, because there were so many representations, deliverables, and talks and conversation for so many years. But I know at least that this agency that did this new road, where people from there said, like, why was this work that sort of put Los Pateños on the head of their line in getting this road. But it's impossible to say, like, what if this map made a difference or not. You know what I mean? So anyway, so this is just the representation, contaminated areas where trash accumulates and so forth. Wanted to turn to the question of the body. I think you're getting a sense of the visceralness of the mud and the water, and as you can imagine, sewage on your floor. People have to start raining. You have to pick up your mattress and put it up on the table, or you have to run away with your kids. Right? It's very visceral, right? So the elders like to tell stories about that, about how the community was first established. So Aquilino, he went by Pica. He passed away this very recently. When we got here, this was a landfill. I haven't told you that, but part of this was a landfill. So they literally built on top of a landfill. It was a landfill of garbage dump. There were flies so big that you couldn't eat anything. You can imagine, right? There are so many flies, and you can't even eat your chicken or whatever. The flies were like bees. It was a lot of work. You saw me full of mud, working there in the grocery store. I remember this. So in other words, he's connecting memory and place to his body, right? Sorry. And so Nicolas is here. He's watching his oral history interview, and Santa is waiting for him to finish. There were no streets. There was mud everywhere. So mud comes up as that's like a signifier that comes up a lot. There was a lot of smoke, because Nicolas built his house higher up on the landfill, where they burned a lot of trash. There was always smoke, right? And everyone was piling up garbage to burn, so they could build a little house. I couldn't stand all the smoke. And then Benito, whose house was on the very bottom next to the cañada, he said, we laid the sand down. So I got sandbags. I put sand and I laid it in the water, right? We'd lay the sand down layer by layer until we reached a height when you could walk on dry ground. The next day, the water swallowed all the sand. So it had been the rain, and the water had just so they come back, and it's like, oh my God, the sand is gone. So we have to make another layer of 5 to 6 sacks high. And that's how the houses down here were built. So he's standing in front of his house. I think this is the last slide for this. Sorry about the body. So here's a picture. I like this story, because this is a picture that we were given this picture by this photographer who had a little photo studio on the street next to Los Patanitos. So he got to know what we were doing, and he said, well, I have a picture from Los Patanitos. So we got the digital copy of this picture. And we were wondering, who is that, you know? Where exactly was it taken? And that years later, we found out who they were. And we showed them the picture. that's Felipe and Maria Amparo. So they're looking at their picture, you know. I thought that was pretty cool, right? So they're seeing that picture. And I said this the first time I'd seen it, but I don't know if that's the case or not. But and you know, so they literally have this is their bodies in the trash, right? And here they're remembering those days. So those stories of struggle are profoundly important to the organizing in the community and to their agency, I feel. They really bring people together, and the elders like to retell those stories, just like Rafael was talking about. You young people don't know anything, you need to learn from us, because we walked all these places. So I guess when I'm just concluding about this kind of work that I do, I find a lot of inspiration in this article that I always have my students read. In the Qualitative Methods journal. So I like this article, and they lay out some principles for, and Luciana will remember from class, what I say, like, this sort of work, and she refers to decolonizing methodologies, and I guess we can call it other things too, because what matters here is these 4 points. Exercising critical reflexivity, which is sort of what I tried to model a little bit, thinking about where I'm coming from and what my assumptions are, right? Learning from people elsewhere. Reciprocity and respect for self-determination. So the idea of, like, always not asking what I can get from this community for my career, you know, but how can I reciprocate? And respecting what the community sort of seeks, you know? Embracing other ways of knowing is what I mentioned at the beginning, like trying to understand, like, how is it land, memory, the place, the body understood from different ontological positions. And embodying a transformative practice, I guess it's like trying to keep doing this on an everyday basis. So, you know, so this learning then that we're doing, I'm showing some pictures of this sort of the types of activities to take place, right? So here's Fanny with her daughter and her granddaughter making some designs of some findings to show to government officials working together, right? And one there showing Filomena, a video, a poster we were putting together for a conference. And here is Brian, one of my students, working with youth on the Photo Voice project. You know, so anyway, just giving a sense of that this intimacy and relationality, this sort of, it's reflected in the methods of our work. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bjørn. We have time for questions, so please, you want to start? I'm gonna give you the microphone.
I talked too long with time, is it? Oh my God, I talked so long, sorry.
It was amazing, thank you.
Danielle, yes.
Yeah, I think this was something that kind of pervaded through the whole presentation, and you mentioned a bit, but this tension between using these types of methods for achieving something at the end versus, I don't want to go into like a process versus end result, but I think it is kind of a question with a lot of these processes, and maybe in your experience seeing how important that process with the storytelling that comes along with making, how much more important that is, perhaps, maybe expanding on that a bit.
Yes, no, I love that question, Danielle. I know I can pay you $100 for that question. No, seriously, it's a really, really important question, and I think I hope I've come a long way in sort of going away from a very sort of instrumental, sort of outcome-oriented approach to this work to now much more process-oriented, to the point of, like, I have to stop myself from, I have to remind myself there needs to be a product too, you know, and how can I answer that question? I mean, I think I've come to appreciate that outcomes are different than products, right? So a product, maybe from the beginning, I would think of the map of Venezuela. That map is a product, right? And maybe my sort of thinking at the beginning, like so many years ago, was like that was the main thing to aim for, was that product, right? But now I think about outcomes is different. So an outcome then is like the way in which that map led to those moments when Rafael sort of yelling at the young people and having that sort of like, okay, you know, there's something needs to be done, which in turn sort of led to a very interesting community-led sort of conversations in the community and various meetings and plan making, indigenous plan making around youth and where people were working with this issue of intergenerational learning that had been sort of neglected. You know what I mean? So to me, that's an intangible outcome, but it's a powerful outcome, I think. You know, I think in Los Platanitos, I think in the last project I showed you, I think we had hopes early on that there was going to be more immediate outcome. So maybe this goes long-term as a short-term outcome, and a more immediate outcome of some sort of relief, some sort of infrastructure improvement back in 2008, 2009. Maybe at least we can garbage pick up or something, you know? And that didn't happen. But instead what happened is that we had that women's organization forming and developing and growing around this composting project that we developed, which I didn't talk about, the composting project. Which also we were hoping for an outcome in terms of income generation. We didn't quite get that, but instead what we got was a longer term emergence of organizing among women that I think, actually I know had a great deal to do with the fact that people got housing. So I guess part of the answer is product versus outcome, part of it is like long-term versus short-term outcomes. And the big lesson is the unexpected outcomes. And maybe another answer is trusting the agency, trusting your partners in the community, and sort of like realizing, okay, I'm contributing, I'm this map, I can do that, I can print that out. They will take that in the direction that makes sense to them, and they have the capacity to do that, you know? I don't have to do that. That makes sense.
Thank you.
Yes.
So when you talk about the long-term agency, sometimes projects break down. Sometimes you're up against an obnoxious state who does not want to listen to partners, want to listen to people. And so in those cases, in the event that a community, for example, project does not manifest in the timeline that the community wants it to manifest, how do we as researchers who want to support and empower come in, react, help, or stop helping, or step back?
Good. That's $1 million question. That's a very good question. So I mean, when you were asking that question, I was thinking back to all the setbacks in my own work, you know, and it sort of alluded to that when I answered Danielle's question. Like the composting project was going strong, and then there was a hurricane that destroyed the composting bins, and then we were like, should we start up again? And I did start it up again, and the city never helped, and they didn't do anything, right? And so it was frustrating, obviously. And we were, from my outsider perspective, I was like, you know, I feel terrible because I was part of this. They were interested in this. I was encouraging. We built this together, and now it's not really bringing in the money. And they were like, it's okay that it doesn't bring in money, because it brings other things. right? So what it did was that it created these spaces for women. That was a really sort of a space where I felt safe, and they were joking with me like, here is like, we are 15 women here, the men are staying away, we have our space. So I think I totally take your question seriously and understand, and I agree with it, but I think there are times when the outcomes have become very different than you expected. And in Los Platanitos, there was a clear case of what you're describing, where the city, we never really got the city to care. You know, the city was, when we were there in the community, the students and me, they said, oh yeah, we'll give you some transportation, here we're gonna have lunch, we'll bring you lunch, and they were nice, you know, but in terms of like spending money, it's no. So then the question becomes like, is that more disappointing to me or to the community members? And the community members are like, we totally didn't expect anything from the city, you know? So I think a lot of this has to do with how you set this up to begin with, the kind of conversations you have, the kind of understandings you have about your capacity and the city's capacity and will and so on. Having those conversations to begin with, I think, is crucially important. So I always make clear that, like, I have no money. I'm not an engineer. I'm not bringing in tons of money from the city. I can't get the mayor to do whatever. This is what I can do. You know, I can do this and this and this project with you. And I think that sets up a playing field of where it's more, more equal, where it's, we are partners in this work. You know, I'm not there to empower them. They're already empowered. They have their agency. Right? I'm there to work with them as partners. Luciana.
I think I don't need. Okay. Bjørn, this is a question that I have to my own work, and when you were speaking, I was thinking about, like, you talk a lot about how you navigate, like, the relationship with the community members, but I am curious to hear more, like, about how you navigate the relationship, like, with the city officials that you were just mentioning in Los Platanitos. So
that's a good question in light of what conversation we had after your defense and stuff. Yeah. Oh man, that's a good question. And I have to say that there have been many times when I've been extremely angry and frustrated with city officials. But I always consult with my partners in the community, right? We'll have these long conversations where I might be saying, I'm really frustrated with this planner or with this whatever agency person. And we commiserate and we talk, and they teach me what they know about the city, about the relationships, and who plays what role and stuff. And they calm me down, and they help me realize that, listen, I have no right. It's not my place to, like, I don't know, to pull the foreign researcher card or something, or to say, like, you know, you are doing the wrong thing. No, I need to be polite. I need to do what's strategically useful for the community members, you know. So that means a lot of navigating these political spaces very gingerly and carefully. And you know, I think there are times when I'm like maybe being more polite and more submissive to the mayor or whatever than I really feel like I want to be. But again, it's like, what's good for the community? I don't know if this helps answer your question. It's very, very tricky, but I'm always guided by the neighbors, by the community members.
Yeah. I think I have a following question. Because so I was showing Sydney some pictures of a place in Iquitos where we work that looks exactly like Platanitos.
Oh, really?
I mean the soil. Yeah, because it's also a dump and it's close to a hospital. So there has been like a lot of problems there because they dump the water from the hospital and from the matadero, the place where they do the meat. So we are working with lawyers there because of the water of sanitation, the right of to water and sanitation, right? Which is kind of new in the world. So, in the sense that the High Commissioner for the Right of Water is calling for communications around the right to have not only access to water but also sanitation.
Yes.
And so this is one thing that made me think a lot about what you were sharing at the parallels in other places. And then another anecdote was when I was sharing with indigenous peoples leaders in Peru what was happening in this community. They asked me, which federation are they from? Why didn't somebody in the federation help them out? And I was like, yeah, they're not part of a federation because they're only, neighbors, local community members. So that let me, what is a way of defending the rights of these communities? How do you handle that when you work?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And I was looking at Luciana because you are interested in rights to water. You need to talk afterwards. I was in Santo Domingo. Dominican Republic is Santo Domingo is like this neoliberal, insane neoliberal place, right? And they used to have very strong social movements, but more like in the 70s, 80s. And a lot of the elder social movement leaders, I came close to them. Those organizations still exist, and early in 2007, 2008, early years, I connected with them, thinking precisely how can we leverage that movement to push for the rights. But those organizations really become weakened in recent years. They're really the funding has been cut. The leadership is sort of aging, and there are arguments among the leadership, and this is not the way it was in like the 80s, maybe into the 90s. I started thinking more maybe in terms, I don't know if you read Farah Nakhmi Raftav's work on insurgent planning, and anyway, she has this view of the state from a Gramscian perspective, where the state is like the neoliberal state is really fractured, and there's all sorts of opportunities to prod and push and get advantages, right? So that is sort of been the principle that the neighbors operate by, because they're like, yeah, these organizations are fine, but no, they're not going to get the job done. What we need to do is connect to key players in the state. So I think that has been one of the approaches that we've taken, because the rights discourse really hasn't really been valuable for that community in that context in Santo Domingo, if that makes sense to you. That context in Santo Domingo, it's been a very conservative government and so on, and we didn't have the support of organizations. So it's been really taking that more pragmatic approach to sort of like looking for openings in the state. Yeah. Okay.
Time for one quick question. A few minutes. Just to wrap up.
Everybody must be getting tired now.
Yeah.
Talking for an hour and a half.
Okay. If not, we can. Yeah, it's just 3 minutes. Thank you so much, Bjørn. Please join me thanking Bjørn.
Thank you.
And remember, we have another lecture, Dr. Deborah Delgado, tomorrow, and we have 2 workshops also. We have 2 guests, so please join us tomorrow for a whole day of work. Thank you.